Hey everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, those who follow my art or even follow this channel, you might have noticed I am quite biased towards Impressionism. I love the way Impressionism looks. I like that that style simplifies the world in such a way that it's appealing, it gives a certain aura, and as well, I'm not a big fan of people who just render every single detail. Now, that's not to say realistic painters are bad, but a lot of people mistaken realism with having a ton of details, which is why Impressionism is a style that kind of avoids that problem while being very hard to master. So, what better way than to analyze the grandfather of Impressionism, Claude Monet? Now, I'm going to talk about four things here, probably a lot more given how masterful his work is. First, let's talk about color variation. Then we talk about logic and how Claude Monet does not break logic of realism at all. Let's talk about how he distributes color, and then we can look into the brushstrokes and what those symbolize. So first of all, apologies, color variation. Now, color variation is a very easy concept to understand, but it's very hard to really master and incorporate in your own work because the colors that you use are very important. So, there's a rule of thumb in art and observation. No color can really exist as a massive, a massive mass of just the same color. And what I mean by that is when you look at any realistic artwork by any means, anything that is trying to emulate realism, you notice that the moment you look at this piece, no mass of value, no mass of color is consistent throughout. So this is naturally done in a lot of traditional work because traditional work, the brushstrokes are forcing you that every little bristle has an individual color, and putting that brush on the canvas will naturally create variations of color. So we can look into, let's get another brush here. So we can look into how something like this mask looks. So from far away, if we zoom out a bit, we notice that it might be just a dark gray patch. But when we start zooming in, you realize naturally because of how Monet paints, the mask is actually a amalgamation of a lot of colors, and of course a lot of it is accidental, but it's also a conscious effort to avoid having super thick paint, just one consistent color, and it looks very unnatural. And what I mean by this is if I were to do this, so a lot of digital painters get into the habit of, because they're able to have a very consistent color no matter what they pick. So with the color picker here, anything you pick, you could just have the perfect color. But that's not true when it comes to just traditional painting because you are mixing colors naturally. And that will create variation. And variation is a great way of creating the sense of realism. And this is something I urge every single artist to do, to never have a mass of color that is consistent throughout. I don't care how you do it, and it doesn't have to be the way Claude Monet does it, but it is a very good way to look into it. And of course, the most prominent area where there's color variation, I would say, is where the sunset creates a reflection here. Notice how, I guarantee you, the brush that he used here, part of it let's just color pick it for the sake of clarity here. Part of it is probably, the most of it will probably be the orange, and then there's one strand or a few strands where the brush has a bit of that white, the yellowish white in there, and that creates this beautiful, beautiful variations of colors when it comes to creating the reflection. So there's little spots of really sharp reflection, and then there's the orange of the sunset, of course. And again, I don't care how you do it. There are a ton of ways to create color variation depending on your style, but always be aware of whether your work is starting to look a bit stagnant when it comes to certain masses. So again, even when you look at these masses, everything here has variations of blue, variations of brown, variations of oranges, something that to distribute the colors naturally and create the sense of realism, despite the fact that this is obviously a very impressionistic piece. I'll talk about color distribution in a bit, but let's talk briefly about logic. So Impressionism is an interpretation of realism. It doesn't mean that it breaks realism, though, and that is what a lot of people kind of get mistaken of. No matter what style you're going for, maybe cartooning, anime, and that sort of thing, I always tell people the best versions of those styles are taking from realism and interpreting realism rather than breaking logic. So logic would mean how the lighting situation is lit. And I won't really bring it up here, but if you were to look at a Van Ho photograph, you'll notice that it's very similar to the lighting here, but obviously his is a photograph, this is Impressionism. Now, what I'm trying to say is, this particular scene, everything looks like it could exist in reality, as if Claude Monet is actually painting a realistic scene, but in an impressionistic style. This is very hard to do, trust me. It is simplification to the nth degree, and the way, again, the way he simplifies the reflection of the sunset, the value of the background is perfect relative to the foreground here, and of course I can talk about brushstrokes a little bit here. Look how he interprets the reflection on the water of presumably the stuff over here. They're just little strokes as if he's doing it randomly, but the reality is this is the decision to put those in is a masterful thing to do. It's not the fact that he can move his arms slightly left and right and left to create these brushstrokes. It's the fact that he knows where to put them. And again, this is I didn't put this in the 4 categories, but the composition is masterful as well, very balanced. And again, everything is logical. Everything seems like it could exist. Masterful values. Perfect hue. Even though there's a lot of things going on, it seems like he simplified it in such a way that, yes, it does feel like a sunset. And it sounds a little bit weird, right, when we look at this, but it is not easy to paint the time of day properly, logically as well. Let's go into color distribution now. Color distribution, what we can pull out of it is, in a composition, you don't want to have a certain color to be exclusive to a quadrant. And I always said this in other videos as well. You want to make sure that the look at how the colors are distributed here. Now, the most prominent color, you could say, is the orange. Notice how the orange is distributed on the top area as well as the sunset. And of course here is a bit more subtle, but you notice that there are patches, again with color variation, with oranges here in order to create the sense that the orange is spreading throughout the composition. It doesn't mean that every single quadrant has to have an even amount of orange or even amount of purples here. We're not mechanical here. We're not robots. We can't calculate that. But you do want to make sure that it spreads throughout the piece. That's color distribution. When you take out colors and make them exclusive to certain parts of your painting, it starts looking like an isolated instance. You don't want that. You want to have a unified piece. And that's part of it. And of course, look at the purples here. The blues here, beautiful. It spreads throughout the piece here. And just masterful work. Claude Monet is somebody you should always look into if you are trying to really understand that art can be simplified to this degree and still look realistic. Realism, again, I always say, it's not about the details. It's never about the rendering. That's what a lot of people get into the habit of doing when it comes to digital work, because digital, again, you could get the perfect colors, you can have zoom in brushes and stuff. You don't need that. You really don't. And just being able to pull back and just having these brushstrokes, having an artist that could do this gives you that feeling that you could do it without rendering too much. Now, brushstrokes, briefly, these brushstrokes are very confident, very deliberate to symbolize certain things in this particular scene. So, for instance, again, look how deliberate these brushstrokes are for the reflection of a sunset. No need to render every little ripple of water. He does it just left and right, right and left, just get it going. No need to create a crazy amount of rendering. And of course, the reflection of the water here, beautiful, beautiful. We don't need to have the perfect reflection. We just need to get the symbolism of that reflection and the impression of that reflection from the top area of course the boat as well. Look at this reflection here. He didn't need to really put the perfect reflection there. We kind of get the idea that it's a reflection, and that's beautiful. It's just a few brushstrokes here. No need to put any more, particular for the style. And again, everything goes back to the logic. There is logic to every single brushstroke here. Notice here as well, beautiful scene here. And again, reflection of this area. And even when we don't have to talk about the reflection, look at the brushstrokes over here to symbolize that there are constructs at the back. Again, no need to get every single detail. We kind of get the impression that it is there. Now, one final note. Where is the brushstroke the most, intricate? You might notice that it's probably the sun itself over here. Now, this is the focal point. This is technically the most careful he probably was when it comes to his, the entire composition, which means that this is technically, quote unquote, the most detailed area because he put more effort in getting the careful circle painted. And everything else you can see is very brushstrokey except for the sun itself. And again, having that decision to do this is masterful. It's not that drawing a circle is very hard, for some people, I guess, but perfect circles can be pretty difficult. But the fact that he chose to make the circle much less impressionistic compared to the rest of the piece makes you look at it more as if he is really careful with this particular sun. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.